Fans of hip-hop and love never forget certain moments, and this one might be the best of them all. Rumors of a heated altercation during a private dinner scene have been circulating for days, but new information from within the set is creating an even more bizarre image. Several insiders claim that things got so out of hand that Sierra threw a full drink directly at Mendeecees. What was the cause for this? According to reports, Erica Mena's confession left everyone at the table speechless. They claim that it began as light banter, the kind that producers like to portray as just catching up, but there was a storm brewing beneath the laughing. Erica's voice reportedly interrupted the conversation with the Mendeecees' assertion that stopped even the crew in their tracks. The atmosphere changed in a matter of seconds. Sierra's tone was tight, and her words were clipped when her eyes met Mendeecees'. According to others, he smirked, the glass rose, the ice hit, and mayhem ensued. Others say he attempted self-defense. The cast is keeping quiet, the internet is ablaze, and everyone is wondering the same thing. What did Erica say that made Sierra lose it? Although no outsider could precisely determine when the shift began, the tension had been growing for weeks. Ever though the cast meals had never been predictable, there was a sense of anticipation before anyone ever took a seat. The energy was different from the typical blend of laughter and light shade that the filmmakers had hoped for with the perfectly positioned cameras and soft lighting. Sierra entered the room in a form-fitting cream dress, her hair pulled back tightly, her gaze sweeping the table as if she were taking the temperature of each individual present. Mendeecees was seated 2 seats away, reclining in his chair and browsing through his phone as if he didn't give a damn about who was looking. Erica, who sat across from him, had an enigmatic countenance that might change at any moment from a storm to a smile. With brief chat between meals and beverages, the evening started out calmly enough. Rashida nodded as Kirk continued his long yarn about a botched business deal, interrupting him sometimes to keep him from going too far. However, anyone observing closely could notice the sidelong looks and the tension that was slipping beneath the table. Sierra's eyes kept straying to Mendeecees, while Erica continued to look down at her wine and slowly swirl it. Erica's voice was just loud enough for everyone to hear as she leaned forward and rested her elbows on the table, thickening the air. Although she didn't bring it up, there was no denying the gravity of what she said. With her gaze fixated on her glass, she started. "I've been holding something in, and it has been bothering me." The collective pause and the change in the air as the forks froze in mid-bite were nearly audible. Curious, Kirk looked up. Sensing trouble, Rasida's brows furrowed slightly. Mendeecees gave her a sidelong glance with a slight grin, as if he had heard this opening before and wasn't impressed. However, anticipating where this would go, Sierra straightened in her chair. After taking a deep breath, Erica went on. "Backstage, the Mendeecees murmured something to me. Something that went too far. The response was instantaneous. Yandy's lips pressed into a thin line as she tensed. Kirk made an uncomfortable change. Rasida gave Mendeecees a short glance and subtly urged him to speak out. However, he didn't. Instead, he folded his arms and leaned back, seemingly challenging Erica to continue. After a long moment of stillness, Sierra broke it. "What did he say exactly?" Before responding, Erica's eyes locked with hers and remained there for a moment. "He said something concerning what I was wearing, concerning my body. It was rude rather than a compliment." There was a sudden surge of energy across the table without any loud gasps or extravagant reactions. Kirk cleared his throat and said something that nobody could hear. Rasida put down her fork, obviously anticipating the outcome of this. Although her fingers was clenched around her napkin, Yandy's face was unreadable. At last, Mendeecees spoke in a calm, yet abrasive tone. "It didn't go like that." Erica laughed a little, but not in a funny way. "You would say that, of course." Sierra's tone became piercing. "Are you implying that she is lying, then?" Mendeecees avoided eye contact with her. "She's twisting it, I say." The way he said it, dismissive, almost bored, made the words hit harder than they should have. Erica's posture straightened as though preparing for a fight, and her expression hardened. The air between them was charged, and the table appeared to contract around them. Sierra's jaw tensed as her gaze shifted from Eric to Mendeecees. She had never shied away from speaking up when she believed someone was being treated disrespectfully, and this time was no exception. "You believe it's acceptable to tell people anything you want, don't you?" she said, raising her voice a little. Mendeecees now turned to face her, his eyes unwavering. "You weren't present," Sierra retorted. "I don't have to be present to recognize when someone is going too far." The discussion broke down as Kirk tried to change the subject. Rashida muttered to herself that this was going to go to the left, and Yandy shook her head and refused to participate. However, the bond between Mendeecees and Sierra only got stronger. Every utterance and every look seemed like a spark added to an already lighted fuse. Now that Sierra was carrying the fire, Erica sat back and stared at Mendeecees as though to silently challenge him to keep pushing. Leaning forward, Sierra said, "Let me get this straight. You act as though she's making it up after she claims that you said something out of the blue?" The Mendeecees did not recoil. "In this group, people say things all the time. Why is it suddenly a scandal when it's me?" The word scandal seemed to linger in the air, intensifying the tension. Sierra's palm gripped her glass more tightly, allowing the moisture to slide between her fingers. Even the crew watching from the sidelines shifted uneasily as she spoke, even though she wasn't shouting yet. Erica's smirk reappeared, harsher this time, almost content that the conversation had gone just as she had intended. Kirk glanced at the beverages on the table as Rashida leaned in to say something to him. Kirk recognized the expression in Sierra's eyes. It wasn't simply rage. It was the instant before she made a decision she couldn't reverse. Mendeecees, who was either unconcerned or clueless, leaned forward and drew closer to Sierra. "You have the option to believe her," he added gently. "But I don't have to explain myself to either of you." There was a pause, the kind of silence that seems to go on forever. Sierra's lips pressed together as her eyes narrowed. Erica looked from one to the other, as if she were watching a match light up. Kirk felt it approaching and shifted once again. When Rashida's hand touched Sierra's arm, it was a silent warning that was totally disregarded. Sierra moved when Mendeecees reached for his drink. She gripped her glass tighter till her knuckles turned white as her chair scraped the floor. She didn't speak louder or make a statement. With her gaze fixed on him, she just raised the glass and threw the entire liquid across the table at his chest in a single fluid move. Liquid splashed over his shirt and dripped onto the floor as ice clinked on the wood. The shock came suddenly, screams, gasps, and chair scrapes. Mendeecees' expression was unreadable as he stopped for a half-second before pushing back from the table. Now the place was in disarray. Members of the crew moved forward, their hands up in a mixture of fear and hesitancy. With an almost calm face, Erica sat back as though this was the logical next step after everything she had spoken. Rashida shook her head and rubbed her temples as Kirk muttered something about this being too much. With her mouth clenched, Yandy stood up and left the table completely, not even looking at anyone. When Mendeecees eventually reached for a napkin, he wiped at his shirt silently while glancing momentarily at Sierra before turning away. However, it was far from over. The room's noise didn't go away. Instead, it changed to a low, buzzing tension that was nearly as heavy as it had been when the drink first hit. Crew members moved about, some speaking into their headsets, others attempting to obstruct cameras from capturing specific views. The remainder of the cast remained motionless in that uncomfortable transitional area, uncertain whether intervening would improve the situation or make it worse. Sierra remained upright, her shoulders stiff, her gaze fixed on Mendeecees as if she were anticipating his answer. The fact that he took his time talking somehow thickened the atmosphere. Instead, without flinching, he sat back a little in his chair, wiped the last of the drink off his shirt, and placed the soaked napkin on the table. "Are you finished?" He spoke in a low, almost conversational tone, but the way it pierced the room caused a few heads to turn. Sierra let out a deep exhale as she cocked her chin. "No, I haven't finished. Not while you're pretending like it doesn't exist and demeaning women." Erica moved in her chair, now focusing on Sierra. She whispered, "Thank you." Loud enough for the microphones to pick it up, but not loud enough to become a scene in and of itself. Nevertheless, Mendeecees noticed it and quickly turned to face her. He shouted, losing his composure, "Don't thank her like you're innocent in all this. You were fully aware of what you were doing." That gave Erica a harsh, almost derisive laugh. "Oh, so I'm to blame now because you can't control your speech?" Rosita straightened her posture and spoke in a tone that was a combination of caution and incredulity. "Could we please calm down before this becomes something that no one can escape?" However, cooling down was too late. Now that the moment had gained momentum, nobody appeared to be ready to slow it down. Sierra closed the distance between herself and Mendeecees by moving around the table. Even though she wasn't shouting, you couldn't help but notice how intense her voice sounded. "You think you can say whatever you want just because you've been here for a while? Not with Erica, not with me, not with anyone." Mendeecees rested their elbows on the table and leaned forward once more. "And you believe you have the authority to determine what truly transpired when you weren't present?" "I think she's real," Sierra retorted immediately. He seemed somewhat aback, if only momentarily, by how quickly she responded. A tiny smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he blinked and turned aside. "Figures." As though to demonstrate solidarity, Erica crossed her arms and shifted her body slightly in Sierra's direction. "You smirk now, but prior to your remark, you were doing just that. You laughed as if it were a joke, and I should have just accepted it with a smile." Mendeecees' voice became softer and more solemn. "The part where you were discussing me first was omitted." That struck the room like another thunderclap. A number of individuals exchanged glances, uncertain of his meaning. Erica's voice rose for the first time as her brows furrowed. "Don't misunderstand. What I said wasn't about you in that way." "That's not how I heard it," he said in a flat voice. Sierra sighed in frustration and turned to face the other chairs at the table. There is always someone ready to turn the tables on them, which is precisely why people don't come forward when someone crosses the line. Kirk gently tapped the table, seemingly attempting to reroute without really entering the flames. "This is going around in circles, you see. Perhaps we ought to all just—" He didn't complete. Erica's voice pierced his sentence as she leaned forward. "I won't sit here and act like nothing happened if that's what you want. I'm not going to back down." Mendeecees' chair legs scraped the floor when he moved it back a little. "You don't need to give up. Simply stop behaving as though your version is the only one that counts." Sierra's jaw tightened once again at the way he stated it. "Is it the case that we are all expected to believe you?" He didn't blink when he met her gaze. "Believe whatever it is that puts you to sleep." The remainder of the table appeared to shift collectively at that point. It was more than just the words. It was the contempt in his voice, the way he appeared to condense the entire discussion into something manageable to ignore. Erica appeared to have more to say, but instead she leaned back and squeezed a thin line of her lips together. Sierra remained upright, but her hands were now on her hips, making her body language obvious even in the absence of words. At last, Rashida spoke once more, this time with greater conviction. "If you guys keep it up, this is exactly the kind of thing that ends up all over the blogs." She was not mistaken in her warning. A crew member was already being instructed to pull specific camera angles just in case someplace in the back, and there was a rumor that someone had recorded the entire incident on their phone before the producers realized. It was almost a given that this would leak outside the set. It was no longer a possibility. Nevertheless, only Yandy, who had vanished minutes ago, rose to depart. The others remained motionless, observing the tight, slow back and forth as if it were a game that nobody wanted to play, but nobody could ignore. Mendeecees' voice was almost too measured now, but he was calmer. "Go ahead and toss me a drink if you feel like the hero. However, it speaks more about you than I do." Sierra remained unflinching. "No. It reveals everything about you." Even Rashida missed it when Kirk murmured something beneath his breath once more. The producers looked at each other, silently discussing whether to intervene or let the scenario unfold naturally. The cameras and microphones remained up, suggesting that the decision was in favor of letting it run. Finally, with a softer but sharper voice, Erica leaned forward again. "It's telling when someone else recognizes it for what it is, but I don't need anyone to fight my battles. Mendeecees' gaze shifted from her to Sierra before returning to the table. Someone placed a fresh glass of water in front of him, and he slowly sipped it. He remarked, "You believe you have the complete picture, but you don't." The words hung there as a statement with weight of their own, not as an apology or an olive branch. Sierra laughed a little, without humor, and shook her head. Although Erica didn't answer this time, it was clear from the way she was staring at him that she wasn't done yet. Every clink of cutlery or changing chair seemed louder than it should have, and the table seemed to be holding its breath. The team had given up trying to conceal their movements because it was useless. As like the rest of the room didn't exist, all of the cameras were focused on Mendeecees, Sierra, and Erica. Uncertain of whether they were witnessing a discourse or the start of something that could ruin the entire evening, the other cast members sat in that limbo between interest and unease. Sierra gradually returned to her seat, but her gaze remained fixed on Mendeecees. Like someone choosing their next play, she walked slowly and deliberately. Erica remained slouched, her arms folded, her eyes darting back and forth as if she was keeping score. Mendeecees, still drenched from the previous drink, appeared almost too calm, and that composure was beginning to annoy everyone more than if he had suddenly exploded. It's funny how the people who say the most outrageous things are the same ones who try to play calm when they're called out, Sierra said steadily at the beginning of her speech. He gave her a fixed gaze. It's not quiet. It's simply not worth shouting at. With a harsher tone, it caused Erica to sit forward once more. You believe that since you are not the one who is disrespected, it is not worth yelling over. Or, Mendeecees retorted, because I didn't treat anyone disrespectfully. Spice, who had been sitting quietly up until this point, eventually rested her chin on her hand as a low moan sounded from somewhere down the table. Are you two going to be up and down all night? Because I have more important things to do. You can go, Sierra said, avoiding eye contact. No one asked you to stay. Spice, obviously not falling for the ruse, grinned and leaned back in her chair. Kirk chuckled quietly, the sort of laugh that comes from someone who knows it's safer to keep quiet. Resita gave him a stern look, which quickly silenced him. Erica's voice broke through the background noise. Want to discuss what was said? All right, let's discuss it. Mendeecees' forehead raised a little. Go ahead. She inhaled while keeping her gaze fixed on him. After everything you've done, you're lucky you can still wear that, she stated in a flat tone, each word purposeful. And you chuckled, as if it were a joke. A few silent damns escaped from adjacent chairs. At that, even Spice sat up straighter. Mendeecees did not dispute the comments, but his eyes took on a new, less defensive, and more strategic expression. And before I said that, you were telling people that I was too old to still be acting like a young boy. You were coming at me first, he continued slowly. Erica gave a brief, disbelieving chuckle. What does it give you the authority to discuss my body? He leaned forward and whispered. I didn't talk about your body. I mentioned how you constantly act superior to other people and then become irate when they respond to you. Sierra gave a severe cut. No, you went too far. You went somewhere you shouldn't have gone, regardless of whether she made a comment about your age. That's what you think, he shrugged. Sierra's voice rose once again, as the shrug sparked something within of her. It's fundamental respect, not just my viewpoint. The weight of the conversation seemed to vibrate through the air. With her lips set in a tight line, Erica was nodding in agreement with Sierra. Mendeecees glanced between them as though he was carefully considering his next move. At last, he leaned back once again and let out a slow exhale. You guys want it to be a headline, but this whole thing could have been a conversation, he remarked. That caught Resita's eye. Do you believe that anyone in this room needs to fabricate drama for a story? You were thrown a drink because you were unable to maintain decorum. That isn't a fabrication. She received no response from Mendeecees. Rather, he returned his focus to Erica. You could have pulled me aside if you didn't agree with what I said. But you desired a crowd. When you said it, you had an audience, said Erica. Well, you have one now while I answer. A few individuals laughed softly at the subtle clapback, but nobody dared to laugh aloud. Kirk touched his phone as if he had received a message, but it was clear that he was only trying to avoid making eye contact. Spice shook her head and poured herself another glass. Sierra softly lowered her voice while continuing to lean forward. "Are you aware of the issue? You don't even recognize the flaw in what you said." Mendeecees gave her a prolonged glance. "And you are so certain that nothing I say matters, aren't you?" Erica stepped in and said, "Because I was there, and I am aware of what I heard." The ensuing silence seemed heavy and agitated rather than serene. Every word and every glare was still being picked up by the team. The footage from tonight is already being tagged for special review, according to someone who hinted that the blogs would devour it. For days, the supporters would quarrel, and nobody at the table appeared to be slowed down by any of that. The sound of the chair legs dragging on the floor broke the tension as Mendeecees eventually pushed his glass away and got to his feet. He answered calmly, "You want me to apologize for something that I don't believe was wrong, and that's not going to happen." Erica gazed up at him without flinching. "If people cease giving you the benefit of the doubt, don't be shocked." His jaw tensed, but he remained silent. Rather, he moved away from the table and moved in the direction of the producer's position at the far end of the room. As he left, the conversation simply changed to whispers rather than ending. Sierra's fingertips delicately tapped her glass as she sat back in her chair. The tension remained in the air as if it had nowhere else to go, and Erica sat forward, watching him until he was out of sight. Every side conversation was tinged with the aftermath of what had just transpired, and the murmurs filled the room like low thunder. In the far corner, Mendeecees stood with a producer who made slow gestures with his hands as though he were arguing, partly waiting to see if he would return, partly attempting to act normal. The remainder of the table sat in a weird limbo. Now that Erica's chair was tilted towards Sierra, they were engaged in a more subdued, but no less passionate conversation. Rosita tried to listen without drawing attention to herself by leaning in a little. Erica was whispering to herself, "I swear, I wasn't even going to bring it up, but the way he's been carrying himself lately?"
No.
It had to be stated. Sierra looked toward the corner and nodded, her eyes tightening. And his attempt to minimize it? "I did what I did for precisely that reason." The Kirk, who was seated 2 seats away, shook his head and laughed a little. "Are you certain you didn't just make this 10 times more significant?" Sierra's voice cut as she turned to face him. In order to get people to pay attention, sometimes things need to get bigger. The gaze was diverted by the sound of footsteps. Mendeecees was once more approaching the table with an unreadable countenance. The producer continued to speak via a headset. Instead of sitting right away, he stood at the head of the table and glanced back and forth between Sierra and Erica. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his tone steady but tense. "I won't continue to argue with you all over what was said. I have my tale, you have yours.
All right.
However, I won't be treated disrespectfully either." Erica's eyebrows went up. "And you don't think you were rude at first?" he retorted. "You can say that all you want, but it doesn't make it true." Rosita sighed and massaged her temples. "To be honest, this is tiring. Trying to act like it's nothing is exhausting," Erica retorted. "But when you're the one it's about, it's not exhausting, it's infuriating." Sierra's tone was fierce as she leaned forward once more. "You simply don't understand." The Mendeecees' eyes shifted to her. "I understand that you're using this as a point of contention because it gives you an excuse to attack me." The remark struck like a spark amid parched grass. Rosita swiftly extended her hand and placed it on Sierra's arm as her chair began to scuff back once more.
Don't.
"It isn't worthwhile." Sierra's voice rose as she added, "No, he won't sit here and ask why I defend someone. I've been through too much to tolerate that kind of mess from anyone." The Mendeecees did not recoil. "And I've experienced enough to recognize when someone is merely attempting to elicit a response." After a few drawn-out seconds of silence, Erica spoke again in a sharper but softer tone. "You know what's depressing? You simply could have had it. You could have said, 'My bad,' but you doubled down even if you didn't mean it the way it came out." His jaw tensed as he gazed at her, but he held back from speaking. Kirk moved around in his chair. obviously uneasy. Spice, who had been observing with a slight smirk, sipped her drink and said something about how this is gonna break the internet. Mendeecees spoke at last. "I won't say sorry for something I didn't do. You are free to embellish it, run with it, or turn it into a plot point. I'm not feeding it, though." The phrase "make it a storyline" struck a distinct chord with everyone at the table, and the meaning was clear. Erica's face hardened as she exhaled slowly. "So, don't be shocked if the plot portrays you as the antagonist." She then pushed her chair back, got up, straightened her clothing, and left the table completely. The room reverberated with the sound of her shoes clicking against the floor. This time, Sierra remained sat and watched her leave before returning her attention to Mendeecees. "You can pretend that this is over," she continued in a low voice, "but it's not."
He didn't respond.
He simply sat down again, took up his unfinished plate, and resumed eating as if the previous 20 minutes had never passed. The vibe was different now, fragmented, unsettling, like a crack running through glass, but the remainder of the table gradually resumed small talk. The crew was already looking at each other behind the cameras, some smirking, some shaking their heads. A few of them muttered about how quickly the leaks would begin. Someone said they had already received a text from a buddy inquiring about the veracity of the rumors. And throughout it all, Sierra sat with her arms crossed, her mind obviously still repeating every moment of what had just happened. Mendeecees remained mute, and Erica remained absent. And that's the current situation. A single remark, a single admission, and a single glass of alcohol flying across the table turned the entire evening upside down. Fans are already analyzing every smirk, every glare, and every phrase captured on camera and posting their own theories on social media. Some others are supporting Erica because they believe she finally called out behavior that has been ignored for too long. Others are supporting Mendeecees, arguing that the entire situation was exaggerated for dramatic effect. Additionally, some people are constantly discussing Sierra, either complimenting her for stepping in or wondering if she went too far. The reality? No one outside of that room is aware of the specifics of what transpired, and those present are obviously not sharing the same account. We do know that these three are going to continue to be at odds with one another. The kind of cast crack that alters the entire dynamic, whether it occurs on camera or off, is the kind that viewers remember long after the season is over. However, I would like to know if Sierra was correct to intervene and express her point in that manner. Was there any justification for Erica to place it on the table in front of everyone? Or do you believe Mendeecees was forced into a situation that wasn't fair to him? As you are already aware, this discussion is far from over, so please share your ideas in the comment section. To ensure you don't miss the next time the set blows up like this, if you've been following the madness, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more, and enable notifications. Your interpretation could be the one that alters everyone's perception.